You might think of kings and queens when you hear the word royalty. But in America, there was once a family whose name was whispered with the same sense of awe and envy. The Vanderbilts represented a kind of domestic nobility that did not inherit castles or crowns. They built their own empire from scratch and crowned themselves with gold, but the same glittering crown would one day weigh them down. Their story is not just a tale of staggering wealth. It is a study in human ambition, frailty, and the psychology of generations who believed they were above history. It invites us to ask, how can a fortune so vast be squandered so completely? How does a dynasty rise and crumble within the span of a few generations? Cornelius Vanderbilt was not born into power. He was a boy ferrying passengers across New York Harbor, smelling salt air and diesel before those words meant anything to him. Born in 1794 to a Dutch immigrant family on Staten Island, he left school at 11 to work on his father's ferry. In a world where money equaled respect, leaving school might have seemed like failure. Yet he was, in the words of biographer T.J. Stiles, the right man at the right time. The War of 1812 would bring government contracts, and the ambition of a 16-year-old armed with a borrowed $100 turned into an entrepreneurial gamble. That first boat, a modest little vessel called the Swift Shore, became the seed from which a fleet would grow. Cornelius was not just moving people across water. He was moving himself from obscurity to the center of America's economic story. By 1817, he partnered with steamboat owner Thomas Gibbons. That partnership gave him access to new technology and to a landmark legal case, Gibbons versus Ogden, which dismantled a steamboat monopoly and opened the waters to competition. The young captain learned that monopolies could be broken and that speed and price were weapons. He was, at heart, a competitor. His colleagues nicknamed him the Commodore because he seemed to command an armada even when his fleet was small. The nickname would stick for life, and soon his fleet was large indeed. He built the People's Line, a populist brand that capitalized on democratic rhetoric and promised affordable passage. He cut fares to undercut rivals and boasted that if he could not run a steamboat at 20% less than a competitor, he would quit. Cornelius Vanderbilt understood transportation as the lifeblood of a growing nation. During the 1849 gold rush, he created a route through Nicaragua that shaved days off the journey to California and earned him $1 million between 1851 and 1852. He reinvested profits aggressively. By the early 1860s, he sold his steamship business and began acquiring railroads. He bought existing lines rather than building new ones, consolidating them into the New York Central and Hudson River Railroad. His vision was not just to own trains, but to control routes, schedules, and ticket prices. In 1871, he began constructing Grand Central Depot, a marvel of engineering that brought trains into the heart of Manhattan and later evolved into Grand Central Terminal. When he died in 1877, the Commodore's estate was worth over $100 million, a sum equivalent to billions today. His fortune exceeded the deposits of the U.S. Treasury and amounted to $1 out of every 20 circulating at the time. With success came a single, stern directive to his heirs: keep the money together. Cornelius believed that concentration, not dispersion, preserved power. He gave 95% of his wealth to his son William Henry Vanderbilt and expected him to build on it. William had grown up in his father's shadow, but proved to be a talented executive in his own right. He doubled the fortune within 9 years. He expanded the rail network across the Midwest and oversaw construction of Grand Central Terminal's underground tunnels for safer travel. He turned the Vanderbilt enterprise into America's first giant corporation. William was also self-aware. He admitted that inherited wealth was a handicap because it left nothing to hope for, with nothing definite to seek or strive for. That confession hints at an internal conflict. He recognized that receiving a great fortune could be both blessing and curse. William Henry used his fortune not only to acquire companies, but also to purchase legitimacy. In 1879, he commissioned what New Yorkers called the Triple Palaces, 3 magnificent brownstone houses on Fifth Avenue. They were not simple homes, but grand statements. One section housed William, his wife Louisa, and their son George. Another housed his daughters Emily and Margaret and their husbands. Fellow industrialist Henry Clay Frick reportedly said that after seeing the palaces, he desired nothing more. These mansions were markers of a new American aristocracy rising on the same grid where immigrants crowded in tenements. They broadcast wealth to old money families like the Astors, who dismissed the Vanderbilts as nouveau riche. When William died in 1885, his estate of nearly $200 million was divided among his widow, sons, and daughters. That division, though equitable, weakened the economic power of each share. His sons, Cornelius Vanderbilt II and William Kissam Vanderbilt, inherited the largest portions, $70 million and $55 million, respectively. But they would no longer be purely captains of industry. They would be performers on the stage of high society. Their wives, Alva and Alice, were determined to break into circles dominated by the Astors. In an era known as the Gilded Age, social acceptance was as valuable as railroads. The Vanderbilt story began to shift from boardrooms to ballrooms. The Gilded Age was a time of extravagance, and no event symbolized that better than the costume ball Alva Vanderbilt threw in March 1883. She had built a French chateau at 665th Avenue, nicknamed the Petit Chateau. She invited 1,200 guests to the most lavish party New York had ever seen. The ball cost an astronomical $250,000, equivalent to millions today. Champagne and catering alone were $65,000. Costumes were $155,730. Alva even manipulated society by initially leaving Caroline Astor's daughter off the guest list, forcing Mrs. Astor to acknowledge her. That single evening ensured the Vanderbilts' acceptance among New York's elite. Lavish spending did not stop there. Alva commissioned the Marble House in Newport, Rhode Island, as a summer cottage, built of 14,000 cubic meters of marble and costing $11 million in today's money. Its staircase was modeled on Marie Antoinette's Petit Trianon. Cornelius Vanderbilt II's nearby mansion, the Breakers, was even larger, boasting 70 rooms. George Washington Vanderbilt poured $4.4 million of his $5 million inheritance into Biltmore Estate in North Carolina, which remains the largest private house in America. The Vanderbilts owned 10 mansions on Fifth Avenue, creating a stretch known as Billionaire's Row. Behind each facade lay the maintenance costs of armies of servants and the heating of ballrooms for a few weeks each year. Even as they spent, the second generation still managed to earn. William Kissam Vanderbilt expanded the rail empire and loved horses and cars. Cornelius Vanderbilt II, the eldest son, dutifully ran the business with his brother. But the third generation, often called the idle heirs, preferred to spend rather than manage. Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt narrowly missed boarding the Titanic, but later died heroically on the Lusitania in 1915, giving his life jacket to another passenger despite not knowing how to swim. Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt, another descendant, died in his 40s from liver failure caused by alcohol. The family seemed to produce more headlines for scandals and tragedies than for business innovations. Family dysfunction compounded financial problems. Divorces were rampant. Cornelius II and William Kissam both divorced, but their successors outdid them. Cornelius Vanderbilt IV married 7 times, and fashion designer Gloria Vanderbilt Cooper, descended from Reginald, had 4 husbands. Their relationships were tabloid fodder and symbolized the Vanderbilt curse. In 1934, Reginald Vanderbilt's widow and his sister, Gertrude Whitney, fought a custody battle over Gloria Vanderbilt, nicknamed the Poor Little Rich Girl. The trial revealed how disorganized and petty the family had become. The quest for aristocratic legitimacy extended overseas. In 1895, Alva arranged the marriage of her daughter Consuelo to Charles Spencer Churchill, the 9th Duke of Marlborough. Consuelo loved someone else and resisted, so her mother locked her in her room and feigned a heart attack until she agreed. The dowry included $2.5 million in railroad stock and $100,000 annual payments. The marriage was more transaction than romance, part of the dollar princess trend, where American heiresses bought titles for cash. Consuelo provided an heir and a spare, then divorced the Duke in 1921 and later sought an annulment, citing coercion. These lavish expenses and social maneuvers masked deeper vulnerabilities. The Vanderbilt fortune was being divided among more heirs with each generation. Without modern trusts or structured investment vehicles, the money fragmented. Estate taxes, introduced in the early 20th century, further reduced inheritances. Heirs lacked financial literacy, and many were uninterested in managing railroads or investing wisely. They invested in yachts and parties rather than in diversified portfolios. Wealth dilution was not just arithmetic. It eroded the power that comes from concentrated capital. When a fortune is split into dozens of pieces and none of the heirs are prepared to grow their share, decline is inevitable. By the mid-20th century, the Vanderbilt wealth had largely evaporated. The Great Depression, 2 world wars, and the rise of income and estate taxes took their toll. In 1954, Harold Sterling Vanderbilt, the last family member to sit on the board of the New York Central Railroad and an inventor of contract bridge, lost control of the company in a hostile takeover. The family had not failed in business so much as they had failed as a cohesive unit. A lack of unity meant there was no centralized defense against outside investors. As historian Michael McGarr put it, they simply ran out of puff. The physical symbols of their greatness vanished. The Petit Chateau was demolished in 1926, Other Fifth Avenue mansions followed. By 1947, the last of them was gone. Today, the site of the Petit Chateau houses a Zara clothing store. The Marble House and the Breakers have become museums open to tourists, not grand homes for Vanderbilts. Biltmore Estate, still owned by descendants of George Washington Vanderbilt, operates as a tourist attraction and winery. Meanwhile, the family's philanthropic legacy endures through Vanderbilt University, endowed with $1 million by the Commodore in 1873, and the Whitney Museum of American Art, founded by Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney in 1930. These institutions may be the real monuments of the dynasty. Perhaps the most dramatic illustration of their decline came in 1973, when 120 Vanderbilt descendants gathered for a family reunion. Not one of them was a millionaire. They had become ordinary Americans, albeit with extraordinary surnames. Some still had trust funds, but none possessed the commanding wealth that once allowed their ancestors to build palaces. The reunion was less a celebration than a cautionary tale. Other wealthy families took note and created trusts, family offices, and educational programs to avoid a similar fate. Gloria Vanderbilt, born in 1924, found herself at the intersection of old money and modern celebrity. After surviving her custody battle, she pursued acting, art, and fashion. In the 1970s, she teamed up with Mohan Murjani to launch designer jeans bearing her signature. The jeans business generated over $200 million in sales at its peak and earned her about $10 million in 1980. She later called the money she earned more real to her than inherited wealth, yet she also faced financial ruin due to mismanagement and fraud. She owed millions in back taxes and had to sell properties. Her life was marked by both independence and tragedy. Her eldest son, Carter, committed suicide in 1988. Gloria died in 2019 with an estate valued at less than $1.5 million. Anderson Cooper, her son and a descendant of Cornelius Vanderbilt, represents a new type of Vanderbilt legacy. He built his career as a journalist, reporting from conflict zones and becoming one of the most respected anchors on CNN. He has been outspoken about the corrosive effects of inherited wealth. He said that his mother made clear there was no trust fund and that if he had expected a pot of gold, he might not have been motivated to work. Anderson believes that passing on huge sums is a curse and intends not to leave large inheritances for his own children. His success is a reminder that human capital, talent, discipline, and purpose can create lasting impact even when financial capital disappears. The Vanderbilts' fall invites comparison with families like the Rockefellers, who managed to preserve wealth by creating trusts, establishing family offices, and educating heirs. The Vanderbilts lacked cohesive governance and allowed individual spending habits to drive decisions. The fact that their fortune was fragmented among numerous heirs meant that any economic shock or personal crisis affected the group disproportionately. While the Rockefellers built philanthropic institutions to reinforce cohesion, the Vanderbilts held lavish parties and launched social coups that required large amounts of capital with no financial return. Some might argue that the Vanderbilts simply enjoyed their riches and that there is no moral obligation to preserve wealth for its own sake. There is truth to that perspective. Wealth can bring joy, and the marble house, the Breakers and Petit Chateau gave pleasure to their owners and guests. Their spending created jobs for artisans, builders, and servants. Yet, the pendulum swung to excess. When consumption becomes the primary goal, it distracts from investments that could sustain a fortune. The Vanderbilts financed building projects that would never generate revenue. They poured millions into celebrating their own status without investing in the businesses that produced the wealth. This was not just spending, it was consumption as identity. There is also the psychological dimension of inherited wealth. William Henry Vanderbilt's remark about being handicapped by inheritance reveals how overwhelming it can be to be born into billions. Without a sense of purpose, heirs may seek meaning in extravagance or escapism. Many Vanderbilt men became horse racers or automobile enthusiasts. Some turned to alcohol or gambling. Without the pressure to earn, there was little to restrain them from exploring dangerous hobbies. Their tragedies, like Alfred Gwynne's death on the Lusitania and Reginald's death from alcoholism, are cautionary tales about the perils of unlimited resources without discipline. As the family fortune dwindled, many mansions were sold, demolished, or converted into museums. The Marble House and the Breakers are now tourist attractions, generating revenue not for the Vanderbilts, but for preservation societies. Visiting these homes today is like walking through the skeleton of an empire. The opulent ballrooms evoke images of costumed guests and champagne, but also the emptiness of a lifestyle that could not last. The remaining Vanderbilt estate of significance is Biltmore, which is still owned by descendants and operates as a business. Its winery and gardens welcome visitors and generate revenue, perhaps fulfilling the Commodore's dream of an enterprise that endures. The Vanderbilt story has been described as a curse, but in reality, it is a lesson in systems. Generational wealth requires governance structures, financial education, diversified investments, and a shared purpose. When these elements are absent, even the largest fortunes can erode in a generation or two. The Vanderbilts did not fail because of one bad investment. They failed because they had no system. They believed that money would manage itself, and they were wrong. Their legacy also includes contributions to culture. Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney founded the Whitney Museum of American Art, using her collection of 500 works to create a home for American artists. Her descendants continue to support the museum. Harold Sterling Vanderbilt refined contract bridge, a card game still played worldwide. Vanderbilt University in Nashville, now a major research institution, has educated generations of students and produced Nobel laureates. These gifts to society outlast the railroads and mansions. They remind us that wealth can be used to build institutions that survive the individuals who fund them. By the 21st century, the Vanderbilt name became more historical curiosity than source of influence. Anderson Cooper's decision to build his own career, rather than rely on an inheritance, reflects a cultural shift away from celebrating idle heirs. The modern economy rewards innovation and adaptability more than birthright. The Vanderbilt's decline underscores how quickly fortunes can vanish and how essential it is to prepare the next generation, not just with money, but with skills and values. In the end, the Vanderbilts were not destroyed by a single disaster. Their collapse was the cumulative effect of divided wealth, lavish consumption, family strife, lack of education, and changing economic landscapes. Their story warns against complacency. It also offers hope. The same discipline and vision that built a fortune can build a meaningful life even without billions. Anderson Cooper's success and Gertrude's Museum remind us that human initiative is more resilient than any trust fund. When we look at the Vanderbilt saga, we see both the glittering temptation of wealth and the fragile, transient nature of power. We are reminded that to create a legacy that endures, one must invest not only in assets, but also in people, education, and purpose. Cornelius Vanderbilt's childhood was marked by poverty, discipline, and the raw physicality of maritime labor. His parents, Abraham and Phoebe Vanderbilt, were subsistence farmers who ferried produce to Manhattan. In those days, Staten Island was a rural outpost. Young Cornelius milked cows and loaded pumpkins before sunrise. He was illiterate well into his teens and was known for his temper as much as his work ethic. Some neighbors called him stubborn and rude, but he understood the value of reliability. He learned that people trust a captain who braves storms and arrives on time. This reliability became a cornerstone of his brand. Long before the term existed, he understood customer service. His early experience with ferries taught him that transportation is not merely about vehicles, but about confidence and continuity. The steamboat wars of the early 19th century shaped the Commodore's business philosophy. Robert Fulton and Robert Livingston held a monopoly on steamboat operations in New York waters. When Thomas Gibbons hired Cornelius to captain his steamboat, it was an act of rebellion. Gibbons challenged the monopoly in court, leading to the Supreme Court case Gibbons versus Ogden. The court ruled that interstate commerce was the domain of the federal government, invalidating state-granted monopolies. This decision not only opened the waters to competition, but also reinforced Vanderbilt's belief that legal frameworks could be as important as boats. He became notorious for undercutting competitors, sometimes running ferries at a loss to drive rivals out of business. His tactics earned him enemies, but also cemented his reputation as a fearless capitalist. Later, when he faced criticism for ruthlessness, he would reply, "You have undertaken to cheat me. I won't sue you, for the law is too slow. I'll ruin you." Vanderbilt's Nicaraguan venture was perhaps his most daring. During the California Gold Rush, thousands sought passage to the West Coast. Vanderbilt created the Accessory Transit Company, providing a route that combined Atlantic steamships, a river crossing through Nicaragua, and Pacific steamers. This route not only saved time, but also challenged existing lines through Panama. The venture involved negotiations with Central American governments and navigation through mosquito-infested jungles. Vanderbilt faced betrayal when business partners attempted to wrest control of the company while he was traveling in Europe. In a legendary move, he wrote a letter stating, "Gentlemen, you have undertaken to cheat me. I won't sue you, for the law is too slow. I'll ruin you." Within months, he had regained control. The episode illustrated his willingness to operate in uncertain international environments and to rely on personal resolve over legal remedies. The shift from steamboats to railroads was not a guarantee of success. Railroads were capital-intensive and rife with corruption. Vanderbilt began by buying shares of the Harlem Railroad when speculators attempted to manipulate its stock. He then acquired the Hudson River Railroad, using his expertise in transportation logistics to justify building new tunnels under Manhattan. He orchestrated a short squeeze on speculators who tried to depress Harlem stock, forcing them to buy back shares at inflated prices. These stock market maneuvers earned him both respect and fear on Wall Street. He believed in integrated systems, linking railroads into networks that spanned the East Coast and Midwest. By controlling both the infrastructure and the scheduling, he could dictate terms to competitors and customers alike. The Commodore was not known for philanthropy, but toward the end of his life, he began to consider his legacy. Influenced by his second wife, Frank Armstrong Crawford Vanderbilt, he made a surprising donation of $1 million to the Central University of the Methodist Episcopal Church South, a school that would be renamed Vanderbilt University. He was persuaded that education could uplift a region still recovering from the Civil War. The gift was controversial. Some criticized him for supporting a Southern institution while he built his fortune in the North. Yet the donation established one of America's great universities and signaled a shift in his thinking. He also gave money to churches and hospitals, though on a smaller scale than contemporaries like John D. Rockefeller. After a lifetime of accumulation, the Commodore seemed to recognize that public institutions could outlast personal empires. William Henry Vanderbilt's relationship with his father was complicated. The Commodore once questioned William's competence, calling him unfit for the business. To prove his worth, William managed family farms and railroad assets with diligence. He was known to spend long hours at his desk reviewing ledgers. When he finally assumed control, he surprised observers by expanding the empire even further. He bought the Nickel Plate Railroad and other Midwest lines, connecting New York to Chicago. His management style balanced caution with aggression. He delegated operations to trusted professionals, but retained veto power over major decisions. Unlike his father, he embraced philanthropy openly. He donated to the YMCA, the Church of the Strangers, and other charities. He endowed the Metropolitan Opera and financed art collections. Yet despite his generosity, he was wary of the corrosive effect of idle wealth. His remark about the handicap of inherited wealth conveys his internal struggle between privilege and purpose. The Gilded Age social scene into which the Vanderbilts thrust themselves was a theater of coded behaviors. Caroline Astor's 400 list purportedly named those worthy of New York's high society. The number corresponded to the capacity of her ballroom, underscoring that admission was as much about physical space as about money. Families who were on the list were considered old money. Those off it were outsiders. The Vanderbilts, flush with new wealth, needed to translate dollars into respect. Alva Vanderbilt's ball and her strategy of snubbing Mrs. Astor were forms of social warfare. Society pages gossiped about the guest lists and the decorations. People whispered about the pearls Alva wore, pearls that once belonged to Catherine the Great. Each party was a bid for legitimacy, and the Vanderbilts were master tacticians. Still, the pursuit of social acceptance consumed resources. Flowers costing $11,000 for a single night may have been beautiful, but they were also unsustainable. Architecturally, Vanderbilt mansions were showcases of art and engineering. The Petit Chateau on Fifth Avenue, designed by Richard Morris Hunt, resembled a French Renaissance palace. Its interior featured rooms styled after various periods, including a Louis XV salon and a Gothic library. The Marble House in Newport used marble imported from Italy and Africa. Its gold ballroom glowed under gilded ceilings. The Breakers, built after the first Vanderbilt house on the site burned down, incorporated electric lighting concealed within decorative fixtures. At a time when electricity was still a novelty, Biltmore Estate combined French Renaissance architecture with modern conveniences such as elevators, central heating, and a 70,000-gallon indoor pool. Landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted designed the grounds with rolling hills, winding paths, and vineyards. These homes were not only personal residences, but also testaments to the marriage of technology and art. Yet they were expensive to operate, requiring dozens of servants and seasonal staff. When income declined, the upkeep became untenable. Tragedy and misfortune seemed to punctuate the Vanderbilt timeline like recurring motifs. Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt's death on the Lusitania shocked the world. He insisted women and children board lifeboats first and gave his life jacket away, embodying an archaic sense of nobility. His cousin, George Washington Vanderbilt's daughter Cornelia, scandalized her social circle by divorcing and moving to Europe to become an artist. Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt was known more for his gambling and equestrian pursuits than for business acumen, dying young from cirrhosis. These tragedies were often framed in newspapers as proof of the family's curse, but they also underline how wealth can encourage risk-taking in search of excitement. When life provides unlimited resources, boundaries blur. The thrill of racing a coach at breakneck speed or gambling fortunes in Monte Carlo may fill the void left by an absence of purpose. The 1934 custody battle over Gloria Vanderbilt was a spectacle of scandal and media frenzy. Newspapers dubbed her the poor little rich girl, not because she lacked resources, but because she was caught between her mother, Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt, and her aunt, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney. Reginald Vanderbilt had left a modest trust for his daughter and little else. Her mother, criticized for her lavish lifestyle and associations with European aristocrats, was portrayed as an unfit parent. Her aunt, an accomplished sculptor and arts patron, sought custody to secure the child's inheritance and reputation. The trial lasted 7 weeks and included testimony about morals, parenting, and money. The public devoured every detail. When Gertrude prevailed, Gloria was sent to live with her aunt. The case highlighted how wealth can distort family relationships and turn children into assets to be fought over. The decline of the Vanderbilt fortune also mirrors broader economic changes. Railroads, once the backbone of American commerce, faced decline as automobiles, trucks, and airplanes offered more flexible transportation. The Interstate Commerce Commission increased regulation, limiting profits. The rise of labor unions increased costs. The Great Depression wiped out portfolios and depressed real estate values. Taxation during and after the World Wars transferred wealth from private estates to government coffers. The New Deal introduced estate taxes that significantly reduced inheritances. The Vanderbilts were ill-prepared for these shifts. They did not diversify into oil, manufacturing, or other emerging sectors. They continued to invest in railroads and real estate while the economy evolved around them. By the time Harold Sterling Vanderbilt lost control of the New York Central Railroad in 1954, the network was already struggling to compete. The sale was not just the end of family control, but also a signal of the railroad industry's waning dominance. Discussing generational wealth inevitably invites comparisons with families who maintained fortunes. The Rockefellers created trusts and family offices that controlled investments and philanthropic initiatives. They held annual meetings to educate heirs about their responsibilities. The Rothschilds established banking dynasties across Europe and practiced strategic marriages to keep wealth consolidated. The DuPonts diversified into chemicals, textiles, and automotive industries. The key differences were planning, education, and purpose. The Vanderbilts lacked a cohesive family mission. Their patriarch believed that concentration was enough, but he did not embed systems to protect the wealth from taxes or from heirs' whims. Nor did he emphasize education. Many descendants had little interest in accounting or governance. As a result, their fortune was like an unguarded treasure chest in a busy marketplace. Anyone could reach in, lawyers, spouses, children, and take what they wanted.